She didn't say a word when he pointed at her. That part matters. Remember it. When Kofi Mensah walked into the Ironwood Combat Club in Sudbury, Ontario on a Tuesday evening in March, she carried one bag, wore no gi, and introduced herself to nobody. She signed the waiver at the front desk, laced up her shoes in the corner, and sat quietly on the bench waiting for the evening class to begin. She was 31 years old. She had short natural hair and the kind of stillness in her eyes that you only see in people who've had to make very fast decisions in very dark places. Nobody in that gym knew any of that yet. The head instructor, a man named Tucker Graves, noticed her the moment she came through the door. Not because he was welcoming, because she didn't look the way he expected someone to look when they walked into his gym. Tucker had been running Ironwood for 6 years. He had a third-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, 2 regional titles from the mid-2000s that he mentioned in every conversation, and a way of standing in the center of a room like he was posing for something. His 2 main training partners, Daryl Fitch and Shane Ogle, were cut from the same cloth, big guys, tournament records, the kind of men who talked loudly about their accomplishments to people who hadn't asked. The 3 of them were running warm-ups when Kofi came in and sat down. Daryl saw her first. He nudged Shane. Shane nudged Tucker. And Tucker, right in the middle of calling out instructions to the class, stopped, tilted his head, and smiled the way people smile when they've decided something before they've checked whether it's true. "Hold on," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Did someone's secretary wander in by mistake?" A few people laughed. Not many, but enough. Kofi didn't look up. Tucker crossed the mat toward her. He crouched to her, slightly, the way adults crouch when they're talking to a child, and said, "Sweetheart, this isn't a yoga class. This is a competition gym. We don't do beginner sessions on Tuesdays." Kofi looked at him then, just looked, calm, level, like she was assessing something and coming to a conclusion she'd already suspected. "I know," she said. "I've been competing for 11 years. Tucker stood up straight. He glanced back at Daryl and Shane. They were grinning. 11 years, he repeated. He made the number sound like a joke. 11 years of what? Exactly? Cardio kickboxing? More laughter, louder this time. And this is the part that struck everyone who was there that night. Kofi Mensah did not defend herself. She didn't list her credentials. She didn't get angry. She simply picked up her bag, walked to the edge of the mat, bowed to enter, and began to stretch. Tucker watched her for a moment. Then he turned back to the class and said, "All right, everyone pair up. New girl, you can shadow from the side until we figure out your level." Kofi looked at him. "I'd rather roll." The room got a little quieter. Tucker smiled again, not a nice smile, the other kind. He looked at Daryl and gave him a small nod, the kind that says, "Handle this." Daryl Fitch was 6'2", 210 pounds. He'd placed second at provincials 3 years running. He walked over to Kofi with his arms slightly out, chest forward, doing that thing big men sometimes do when they want to remind a room of their size. "Sure," he said. "Why not?" They squared up on the center mat. What happened next took 41 seconds. If you don't train, let me explain it this way. 41 seconds is nothing. It's the time it takes to pour a coffee. It's barely enough time to change your mind about something. But on a competition mat, 41 seconds against someone who knows what they're doing is an eternity you won't forget. Daryl shot for a takedown. Standard, aggressive, the move he probably used to open every match. Kofi sidestepped it so cleanly that for a moment she wasn't where he expected her to be at all. Before he could reset, she was behind him. Before he could turn, she had his back. Before he could defend, her arm was under his chin, and the choke was locked. Daryl tapped. The room was silent. Tucker's smile had gone somewhere. He was looking at Kofi the way people look at something they've misidentified and are now having to recalculate. Shane Ogle stepped forward without being asked. He was the larger of the 2 training partners, 220, maybe more, with a low center of gravity and a defensive game that had kept him in matches long past the point where he should have lost. He was not the kind of guy who got submitted easily. Kofi stood up, shook out her arms, and waited. Shane came forward with more caution than Daryl, more patience. He worked for position, tried to slow the match down, tried to use his weight. He had 45 seconds of success at this before Kofi switched angles on him so fast that 3 people in the room audibly gasped. She took a collar tie that turned into a trip, that turned into a mounted position, that turned into an armbar so precise it looked like a diagram from a textbook. Shane tapped 53 seconds. Tucker was standing very still. You could feel it in the room, that specific pressure that builds when the thing everyone has been pretending isn't happening becomes impossible to ignore. The newer students, the ones who'd laughed, were no longer laughing. A few of them were watching Tucker now, not Kofi, watching to see what he would do with what had just happened. What he did was straighten his belt, roll his shoulders, and step onto the mat himself. "My turn," he said. He said it like it was a correction, like the previous 2 minutes had been an administrative error he was about to resolve. Kofi Mensah looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." What Tucker did not know, what nobody in that gym knew yet, was that Kofi had spent 4 years as a combat athlete with the Canadian Armed Forces stationed in Petawawa. She had trained under a 2-time world champion based out of Montreal. She held a black belt she'd earned at 26, the same year she completed her second tour. She had rolled with people who trained for a living, people whose names appeared on international podiums, people who treated grappling the way surgeons treat surgery, with precision and without sentiment. Tucker Graves had a regional title from 2007. He lunged. Kofi moved. And the thing about watching someone who is genuinely, technically superior, and I mean a full level above, not a little better, not slightly sharper. The thing about watching that is it looks almost gentle. There's no scrambling, no desperation. Everything has already been calculated 3 steps ahead, and you're just watching the steps land. Tucker tried 5 things. He got none of them. On the 6th attempt, Kofi caught his arm, adjusted her hip, and put him into a kimura that left him absolutely no option except to tap or hear something break. He tapped. 38 seconds. The gym was completely quiet. Tucker stood up. He was breathing harder than the match warranted, which meant the exertion had been more internal than physical. He looked at Kofi. His jaw was set. His eyes were doing something complicated. And then he said, and there are at least 12 people who will tell you, this is exactly what he said. That's not real jiu-jitsu. You've been taught bad habits. Whoever trained you did you a disservice. The room held its breath. Kofi looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and unfolded a piece of paper she'd clearly carried in there for no reason related to this moment, because she hadn't known this moment was coming. It was a tournament bracket, international level. Her name was in the final. There was a stamp on it, a date, a location. She held it out to Tucker without saying anything. Tucker didn't take it. He turned and walked back toward the instructor's table. "Class is resuming," he called out. Everyone back to drilling. Nobody moved for about 4 seconds. Then, slowly, they did. But something had shifted in that room, and everyone present felt it. One of the students, a younger woman named Petra, who'd been training at Ironwood for about 8 months, stayed behind when class ended that evening. She approached Kofi at the equipment rack and said quietly, "That was the most impressive thing I have ever seen in this gym." Kofi thanked her. She was already packing her bag. "Are you coming back?" Petra asked. "Next Tuesday," Kofi said. She kept that word. She came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and the one after that. And the strange thing, the thing that would matter later, is that she never once brought up what had happened. She didn't hold it over Tucker. She didn't seek out witnesses. She just showed up, worked, and rolled with anyone who asked. But here's what Tucker Graves did. In the 2 weeks after that Tuesday, he started making noise in the local training community. He told people at a regional coaching seminar that he'd had to remove a disruptive student from Ironwood. He said she'd been aggressive. He said she'd misrepresented her credentials. He called it a safety issue. These are not small things to say about someone in a small community. These are the kinds of things that follow a person. Word eventually got back to Kofi through Petra, who'd overheard it at a different gym across town. And it was Petra who decided to start asking questions. What Petra found, with some help from people who knew Tucker before he came to Sudbury, was considerably more interesting than anything Tucker had been saying about Kofi. Tucker Graves had claimed, in multiple forums, on his gym's website, and in at least one local newspaper interview, that he had served in the Canadian military and received his initial grappling training there. He used this claim to establish his credibility. He mentioned it when recruiting students. He mentioned it in the gym's marketing materials. He had not served in the military. Not one day. He had attended a civilian BJJ academy in Ottawa, starting in 2003. That's it. There is nothing wrong with that origin story. Thousands of people have built excellent careers in grappling that way. But Tucker hadn't told that story. He'd told a different one. A false one. When Petra brought this to Kofi, Kofi sat with it for a while. "What do you want to do?" Petra asked. Kofi thought about it. Then she said, "I want to talk to him first." She did. She sent Tucker a message through the gym's contact form. Straightforward, private, no CCs, no witnesses. She told him she was aware of the discrepancy between his claimed background and his actual record. She told him she was not interested in drama. She asked him to correct the record on his website and to stop telling people she had misrepresented herself. He did not respond. He blocked her instead. What happened after that moved faster than Kofi expected, because by then, other people were paying attention. The local grappling community in Northern Ontario is not huge. Word travels between gyms the way it always does in small communities, through training camps, through shared instructors, through the kind of informal network that forms when people spend enough time together on mats getting choked. When two coaches at other gyms heard what Tucker had been saying about Kofi, and then heard about the military claim, they started asking their own questions. Within 3 weeks, a formal complaint had been filed with the Provincial Athletics Association regarding Tucker's misrepresentation of his background in promotional materials. A second complaint had been filed by a former Ironwood student who said Tucker had used the military claims specifically to pressure him into signing a long-term membership contract. Tucker retained a lawyer. The lawyer, as it turned out, didn't have much to work with. The association's investigation took 7 weeks. At the end of it, Tucker Graves was found to have violated 2 sections of the Provincial Coaching Certification Code. One related to truthful representation of credentials. One related to conduct toward students. His certification was suspended pending review. The false military claim, documented across multiple platforms and a newspaper interview, was referred to a separate body for assessment of potential consumer fraud violations related to the contract situation. Ironwood Combat Club closed its doors 6 weeks after that. Not dramatically, not with a news story. It just stopped having classes one Thursday and didn't reopen. Daryl Fitch and Shane Ogle, to their credit, went on to train at other gyms in the region. Both of them, in separate conversations with people who later talked to Petra, said more or less the same thing, that they'd known something was off with Tucker for a while, that the evening with Kofi had clarified things for them, and that they were embarrassed by how they'd behaved. Shane, specifically, drove 40 minutes to a gym where he knew Kofi sometimes trained and asked to speak to her. He apologized in person. He said he'd had no right to go along with it, and that watching the way Tucker had treated her, and then watching the way Tucker had tried to damage her reputation afterward had made him feel genuinely ashamed. Kofi thanked him. She rolled with him that afternoon. They shook hands when it was done. Petra, meanwhile, had connected with 6 other women who'd trained at Ironwood at various points over the past 4 years. 3 of them had left because of Tucker's attitude. 2 had been told directly that women in the gym were a liability issue and discouraged from competing. 1 had been told she'd never have the physical capacity to really compete on the day she came in to test for her blue belt. The 6 of them, plus 3 others who came forward later, put together a written account of their experiences at Ironwood. They submitted it to the Provincial Association as part of the ongoing investigation. They also shared it, with permission from everyone involved, with a journalist at a Sudbury community news outlet who had reached out after the certification suspension became public record. The piece ran on a Saturday. By Monday, it had been picked up by 3 regional outlets. Kofi gave one quote. Just one. It read, "I showed up to train. That's all I wanted to do." That sentence, small as it is, said everything that needed to be said. The 9 women continued training. Petra passed her blue belt test at a different gym, under a female instructor who'd driven up from North Bay specifically to evaluate her. She cried a little afterward and said it was the best day she'd had in a long time. Kofi Mensah still trains in Sudbury. She's been invited to coach a women's fundamentals program that starts in the fall. She hasn't decided yet whether she'll take it, but people who know her say she's seriously considering it. She still carries herself the same way she did the night she walked into Ironwood. Bag on one shoulder, eyes level. Stillness that belongs to someone who has been in situations where stillness mattered. She still doesn't say much. She doesn't need to. The mat says it for her.